Sorry about that. So the SDEC is a free group for providing education. You could see the 10 topic categories that we have here. And these topics have webinars associated with them. We haven't had webinars in all of them yet, but we're starting to kind of build up our roster. So when you originally signed up for the SDEC, if you did not sign up for one of these topics, but now you change your mind, just feel free to email me or DM Adam Greco in the Slack group, and I can add you to any of these groups. So far, the SDEC has been growing gangbusters. We just passed the 2,000 member mark, which was a big milestone for us. We're currently in 68 countries, over 600 cities, and just in the Google Analytics channel, we're closing in on 1,500 folks. If you know of people who would benefit from any of these sessions, there's a link here that I'll put in the chat in a little bit that basically will allow you to invite someone. And again, it's open to anyone. And if anyone who's listening to this is kind of getting a link from one of their coworkers, feel free to join. Again, no cost. We're not marketing to you. It's just a free thing for you to participate in. If you do join the Slack group, there's a couple things that would really be helpful. Email is becoming a little tricky with this many people. Google Mail isn't liking me and thinking that I'm spamming people. Right now, we have about 72, 73% of the people in the Slack group. We're trying to get that closer to 100% because that gives me more ways to communicate with you. When you join the Slack group, if you can, please make your username and display name your first name and last name, because we do have a lot of people with the same names and it's getting a little bit confusing, and I want to make sure everyone gets invited to the right things. And while we are still emailing, the 2 email addresses I would highly recommend that you add to your contacts in your email client if you want to make sure you're getting all of our webinar invites is SDEC@searchdiscovery.com and no-reply@zoom.us. That will make sure you're getting all the emails from us. If your organization blocks Zoom, just let me know. Just reach out to Adam Greco or email SDEC, and I can show you an alternative way that you can get to these webinars. And if you're getting too many emails and you want to just follow the calendar and don't want to get email reminders, just DM Adam Greco, DM me in the Slack group, and I can modify your registration. We are looking to get more members in the group. We found that the more members we have, the better chance we have of getting really cool people to speak. I think once we hit 3,000, I might be able to get Avinash to come and do a webinar. So if you have other people, please go ahead and invite them. And I do have a little referral thing where we're going to do a little prize to the person who refers the most people to the SDEC. So if you have the people you're referring, put your name in the form that the little area I added to the form, you might get a nice little prize. Upcoming, we do have a lot of webinars planned. We have 34 total, but we've already done a bunch of them. So between now and January, we actually have 25 webinars scheduled. All of them will be recorded, so I don't expect you to attend all of them. But if you want to check them out, there's a calendar and there's a list here. The one that I thought would be most appropriate to this group is in a week or two, we're going to have Krista Seiden coming and talking about Google Analytics. And most of you who use Google Analytics probably know Krista Seiden. So I wanted to highlight that one, but feel free to take a look at all the other ones that are coming as well on the calendar. And speaking of which, there is a shared free Google Calendar out there that you could add if you ever want to see all the webinars going on. And I will put a link in the chat as well while Ken's doing his presentation if you want to add that to your list of calendars. And then lastly, before I hand it off to Ken, during this session, if you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, it doesn't help us very much. If they're in the Q&A, then we can answer them. Even if we don't get to them today, we'll answer them afterwards. So please use the Q&A area of Zoom and not the chat for your questions. And I will now hand it off to Ken. Go ahead. Thank you so much.
All right. Oh, there's your last slide. All right. Thank you, Adam. So before I jump in, I want to do a couple things. So I'm going to move a little bit quickly. I have a lot of slides. There's a lot to know. I just want to start off up front by reminding everyone we are recording this session. So if I've skipped through something kind of fast, then you're welcome to ask a question at the end, but also you'll have access to that recording as well. So before I jump into the presentation, I'm going to do a very brief intro to myself and why I was asked to present on today's topic. And I think that I can do that in just a couple slides. So I started working with Google Analytics about a decade ago. And I actually got connected with Search Discovery back in 2011 when I was leading the digital analytics team at the American Cancer Society. So SDI got me connected with the tag manager they were building. I was a huge early adopter and advocate of Satellite. And so when it was acquired by Adobe, I came to join the Search Discovery team. And I've been a consultant here for almost 7 years now. In that time, so shortly after I started at Search Discovery, I began overseeing all of our Google Analytics clients. So I've been working with a really incredible team to build Search Discovery's services for Google Analytics and GA 360 products for that past 7 years. So I've worked in a variety of roles. Obviously, I've done a lot of project management, implementation, BD strategy. So that brings us a little bit to the topic of today. When Google announced the beta release of App+Web properties last July, I was very confident that I would be able to pick it up and run with it. So late last year, I convinced a client to try it out. And remember, this was a brand new product. So this was my first implementation, full implementation across website and mobile apps. And I was very surprised by how challenging it was. So I can tell you that App+Web is a completely new version of Google Analytics. Data is collected differently, it's stored differently, visualized differently. And switching over from a legacy version of GA to App+Web is just something that you can't do overnight. So when I realized this, started writing down lots of notes for my own team so that we could ramp up on this product to start using it with clients. I documented best practices, tips, and a lot of conversations I was having with the support team. And then when the pandemic hit in March and a little bit of unexpected free time opened up, I published all of those notes to a blog that I maintain now at ken-williams.com. So this is just dedicated to helping analysts ramp up on App+Web properties. So that's a little bit about me, my history, and why I was asked to present on this topic. So today, we're going to start by discussing some immediate benefits that you'll notice when you begin using an App+Web property. And I'm going to break this down a little bit by role. So you'll see different benefits if you are an analyst versus a marketer versus a developer. Then we're going to discuss the new data model that enables these benefits under the hood. And then finally, I'm going to end with some upcoming challenges that you're going to face when you start using this and how to prepare for them. But first, there are 2 things that you need to know before we even get started. So the first is that back in 2014, Google acquired a company called Firebase. So if you're unfamiliar with Firebase, it is a suite of products for developing mobile and web applications. One of those products is called Firebase Analytics. So when you use an App+Web property, what you're doing is streaming data into Firebase Analytics, and you're linking that Firebase project with Google Analytics. So this is very confusing for a lot of people. I get tons of questions about what's happening here. So that's some important context. A lot of times you have probably heard people talk about Google Analytics for Firebase. Since July of last year, App+Web and Google Analytics for Firebase are really kind of interchangeable terms for a lot of people. Now this one I have is number 2, but actually if you only remember one thing from today's presentation, I would take this. So despite the name, you do not need a mobile app to use App+Web properties. This is definitely the second most common question that I get. The way I like to say it is, if you use Google Analytics today, you will soon be using an App+Web property. Okay, so let's get started by talking about some immediate benefits that you'll notice when you switch over from a legacy version of Google Analytics. And then after I talk about these benefits, I will lift up the hood and talk about why they're possible. So I've put a lot of thought into the best way to summarize the benefits, the goal of App+Web, because it does solve a variety of problems with universal analytics. This is the best that I've come up with. I like to say the ultimate goal here is to provide a better representation of user behavior while allowing you to spend less time collecting and aggregating data. So I will explain why I believe it provides the better representation of user behavior second. I'm going to talk about that when we discuss the data model. But first, I want to talk about how App+Web lets you spend less time collecting and aggregating data, and I'm going to break it down by role. So if you are a data analyst, there are a couple of things that you'll notice right off the bat. As the name suggests, I think I need to lead with the most obvious one. If you do happen to manage both website and mobile applications, then you will finally truly have the ability to roll up your data across both platforms. This is far more powerful than the roll-up properties that you may have used in the past because the data under the hood is now the same across platforms, which it was not in the past. So for everybody else, even if you don't use a mobile app, if you're just using Google Analytics on web, you're also going to notice that a lot of the standard reports that you're used to using with Google Analytics have been replaced by some really powerful tools for conducting analysis. And many of these tools were previously only available to companies that paid $150,000 a year for GA 360. Something that's important about this, and one thing that I really like about App+Web, is that if you think about how companies use Google Analytics data, people tend to fall into one of two categories. So some people, number one here, are viewing a dashboard with KPIs so they can see how well they're performing against targets that they set. Whereas there are other people who are actually analyzing data to answer business questions. Universal analytics fell somewhere between these two use cases. It was really not an ideal tool for number one, for building dashboards, because there's no place to enter KPIs and measure progress towards them. So most people use Data Studio or a similar BI product for this. On the other side, if you wanted to conduct deep analysis, you were really limited to custom reports, or maybe you could enable the BigQuery export and start digging into your data that way. App+Web properties, however, they are firmly a tool for analysis for number two on this list. There is an analysis section in the tool. This was previously only available to GA 360 users. Now it's available for free to everyone. And this section has been really greatly enhanced so that you can do things like just simply explore data, which is similar to how you previously would have used a custom report. You can now analyze individual users. You can create custom funnels, which was also previously only for GA 360. You can compare segments. And there's even a new tool for conducting path analysis that's a huge step up over the behavior flow reports that you've probably seen before. The other reason I think App+Web is very strong in category number two here is the BigQuery export. So it's now available to everyone, even users on the free version of GA. You can use that to run SQL queries against your data, join it with other sources. It's an extremely powerful tool. There are costs to BigQuery, but it's worth highlighting there's a really generous free tier. You don't necessarily have to even pay for that feature unless your data and queries are above some threshold. Okay, so that's data analysts. Now I'm going to jump into marketers. So if anyone on this call is a marketer, you're arguably going to benefit the most from upgrading to App+Web properties. And I've got three things here that I think are the most stunning immediate benefits you'll notice. So number one, predictive audience generation. This is a very cool feature. So App+Web, this was just released a couple of weeks ago, has a new tool for grouping users into audiences based on the probability that they're going to make a purchase or churn within the next 7 days. So you can think of this as similar to programmatic ad buying, except that it's leveraging your first-party web behavior to generate predictions rather than relying on a third party's black box. Now, Universal Analytics had bits and pieces of this. There was something called conversion probability. There was SMART goals. What's different here is that this is much more integrated to the rest of your reports. From the similar work that I've done, the performance of these segments has been really impressive. So I have a suspicion that when this rolls out and people are using this 2 or 3 years from now, it's going to be pretty standard practice for retailers and subscription services to really rely heavily on that. So that's predictive audience generation. Number 2, there are new engagement metrics. So if your goal is to drive users to engage with your website, this is very common for someone in healthcare industry, news, blog content, for example. It's extremely important to know which users are truly reading articles, scrolling, watching videos, that kind of thing. So when we talk about the new data model, I'm going to go deeper into this. But here I just want to highlight that App+Web launches an innovative new way to help you track user engagement. And it completely removes the concept of a bounce rate. So more on that in a moment. Number 3, this is the homage to the name App+Web. So of course, if you do happen to manage both, your ability to truly roll up data means that your campaign attribution and your audiences, these are going to finally be intelligent enough to consider all of a user's touch points, regardless of the platform that they're interacting with you on. So that's a mouthful, but that's the immediate benefits for marketers. Next, developers. So a couple things I want to say about developers. When I use the word developers, I'm also referring to anyone who's responsible for installing or maintaining analytics tags. So number 1 is if you use App+Web on a website, many of the common user interactions that previously you had to write a lot of custom JavaScript for have now been built into the tool. So you can flip a switch to enable scroll tracking, video plays, exit link clicks, and a lot more. So this is just code that we used to all write, and it's now managed centrally, and it's one less thing for you to have to worry about. The second thing on this list, though, is actually the thing that I'm more excited about. App+Web properties have a built-in report called Debug View that allows you to isolate the real-time data flowing in from your own machine while you're testing code. So this means that you really don't have to teach non-technical teams to use Chrome developer tools or Charles Proxy or Fiddler anymore. So there are still reasons why a developer would want to use those, but for end testing, it's a lot of that can be replaced with this report. So very nice. All right, so those are the immediate benefits. I want to segue now and talk about how these are possible. So the short story is that, well, you can't talk about App+Web properties without talking about the event-driven data model. So to get into this concept, if this concept is new, I know actually we just had a community meeting on the event-driven data layer. Forget about that for a moment. This is slightly different, although maybe a future session we'll be talking about how they work together. But first of all, this is the home screen in Universal Analytics when you log in today. A couple things I want to point out about this. The biggest one is that sessions are undeniably the most important metric in your legacy Google Analytics reports. So if somebody asks you the question, how much traffic did our campaign drive? Usually the answer is in the number of sessions, right? Or if someone asks, are users engaged with the site? You have a couple of things you can go to. You might say bounce rate, which is a subset of sessions. You might say session duration, like shown here. You might use pages per session. Again, all of these are based on sessions. Even conversion tracking, e-commerce conversion rate, goal conversion rate, those all use the number of sessions in the denominator of the calculation. So the problem with this is that the concept of a session can be very difficult to apply to a mobile app, and in many cases, a web app as well, because the fact is that apps are just more variable than traditional websites. So the assumptions that we make about how users experience the web don't always hold true for how users experience a mobile app. So as an example, I like to run, I use the Strava app, which you might have seen before. If I am setting up Google Analytics in this app, I have to make some choices, right? So say that I enable the app, I go for a run. All I'm really using it for is tracking my speed. I let it run in the background for maybe an hour and a half. You have to make decisions about how many sessions should that create. When you unlock your phone to check your pace, what is that? Is that a screen view? We're just trying to fit a bit of a round peg into a square hole here. So the solution is this event-driven data model. What this does is a couple of things. So first of all, we're eliminating this concept of a hit type, which previously, a hit type could have been a page view, a custom event, track social, transaction. And we're replacing it with three very simple components. You have events. Events have parameters, which are just things that describe that event. And then you also have user properties, which, as it sounds, just describe that user. And that's really it. One of the event parameters that you will always set is called event name. So whereas you previously set a hit type of page view anytime a page loaded on a website, you'll now fire an event where the event name parameter is set to page_view, like is shown here in this example. So at the surface, very minor change, right? We're just sort of eliminating a few columns, redefining a few others. And I do want to pause just for a second before I talk about the impact of this to say that Google did not invent this event-driven data model. There are other products that have been applying it, but with Google's market share, App+Web is a big deal. This is the first time it will be applied at this sort of scale. So the last thing I'm going to say before I talk about the impact of this is App+Web properties do have in this new model a special new automatic event called user engagement. User engagement automatically fires periodically while the app or browser is in the foreground. And what this does is it allows you to determine whether a user is actively viewing your content or if they've simply opened a page and then locked their phone and moved on to something else. This event also enables some of the very helpful user engagement metrics that I'm going to get into in a few minutes. Okay, so what is the impact of the new data model? So there are a couple of things. One is that page views and sessions are no longer the fundamental building blocks that they used to be in older versions of GA. So they still exist, but you're not required to use them where they don't make sense because they're not necessary for measuring engagement anymore. So that's really important. The other thing is that these familiar metrics, bounce rate, session duration, pages per session, they've been replaced with some new metrics that use this user engagement event. So there's one called engagement rate, sessions per user, and engagement time. The other thing is that comes out of this, sort of as a result of this, is that undoubtedly the most important metric in the new App+Web property has changed from sessions to users. So Google has been talking about emphasizing users over sessions for years. So this isn't new, but App+Web properties really force this change in a way that no other changes up to this point have. This emphasis away from sessions is really apparent when we talk traffic sources. So I wanted to dig really quickly into what's going on with traffic sources here. So, of course, App+Web properties are still in beta. Changes are coming out all the time, but there is no comparable channels report in App+Web properties right now. And this could be confusing to a lot of people because that's a report that some people use every day. Very popular report. And the reason that it's not in there, as you can see from this screen, is because Google is forcing you to make some choices when you look at your traffic sources that we did not have to make in legacy versions of GA. So there are two of them. The first is if you're looking at campaign performance, for example, one, which attribution model would you like to use? And two is, are you looking to analyze first-time users or repeat users that are coming as part of a re-engagement campaign? So this screen is an example. If you try to add the medium dimension to an App+Web Explorer report, this is what you'll see. Each of your campaign dimensions, campaign, medium, source, has been replaced with 8 dimensions in analysis. So this user medium that you see at the beginning of 4 of these is what you want to use if you're analyzing acquisition campaigns. So it's a first touch approach, and it tells you the traffic source that the user used on their very first visit to your site or app. Event medium, which is on the other 4, is used for re-engagement campaigns. So this is your last touch. What was the most recent traffic source that a user used? Once you have that lined up, then you have to choose one of these 4 attribution models: cross-channel last click, last engagement, which can include not only clicks, but like a view-through impression that drove you to the site. And then you can also use Google Ads Preferred for both of those. So I do want to say there's an enormous amount to talk about on traffic sources. I don't have time to get too deep in the weeds on this call for this, but I do want to let everyone know I've been working on a massive blog post about this, and I've been working on it for about 2 months, and I am very close to being finished. So when I have that ready, I'll share it with this group. It's going to explore when you would use different items from this list, and also some of the flow charts for how sessions are attributed based on those choices. So as soon as that's ready, I will post it in the SDEC Google Analytics channel for anyone who wants to go deeper into this topic. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is where I lost my notes. The data model and some of the benefits of it. So I have this simplify slide here because I mentioned previously what we're talking about is 3 very simple concepts, right? There's events, event parameters, and user properties. What's really nice about this new data model is that it applies really well to apps and websites. But there's another element to this that is really handy, which is that Google has also given us a bit of a blueprint for how to best track common items. So this blueprint is called suggested events. So this is a list of commonly tracked actions and instructions for what parameters you should be setting with those events. So I have an example here, page view. First time, full disclosure, first time I set up App+Web for a client, I just typed in an event name of page view without the underscore in the middle. And if you do that, you're not using the suggested event from Google. Google suggests that you give it this name. The reason that this is important is because when you give your events the suggested names, you're providing context so that Google understands what this data is. So as a result, the App+Web property can provide additional reports with information that you might find useful about the events you're collecting. So if you use the page_view event name, then this card pops up in GA. And very handy, this just tells you a couple of common metrics that you might want to see: ratio of users who have engaged with each page. And as you can imagine, there's not a ton of this now. App+Web is still new, but as you can imagine, if you set a good foundation now of using these suggested events, then as the product is built out in the future, you've kind of set yourself in a position to benefit from more features like this being rolled into those reports. Additionally, one more thing I want to say about this is that since more websites and apps will be tracking actions in a similar way, this gives a bit of order and best practices to what is otherwise a chaotic internet. So if you've been implementing GA for the past few years, you may have noticed that everyone does things differently. So if you see scroll tracking on a page today, some websites might be firing a custom event. Others could be setting a custom metric on the following page view of how far down you scrolled. Some people will use dimensions instead of metrics. These suggested events provide structure that, as an industry, we can all converge around. Here's the best way to handle this scenario, which is something that I really like about this. Okay, looking at the clock, I know we're a little bit less than 15 minutes left, but I do want to hit on some of the upcoming challenges. I'm going to do this quickly and then I'll open it up for QA. So this is kind of the dark side of all the progress that we've been talking about. The biggest one is that some frustration is coming. And the reason is because Google Analytics gave us a set of tools for understanding how well our websites and our campaigns perform. They've been widely adopted. They've been around for over a decade. And we're very good at asking the questions that these tools are designed to answer. But with App+Web, Google really forces you to ask some new questions of your data. They're forcing you to ask, everything that I have come across is better, smarter questions, but they're questions that are going to take some transition time. So quick example here, you might have your boss ask, which traffic channel drove the most users last month? And this is not a bad question, and it's probably one you're asked all the time, but now you have to think a little bit. Are we trying to draw first-time users in an acquisition campaign? Are we trying to re-engage users who've been to the site before? So this is something that's a little bit frustrating. You might get the response of, just tell me which landing pages have the lowest bounce rate. Well, that's not a thing anymore. So we've got to learn how to communicate internally. There's a switch that's happening. It's going to be a little bit frustrating, especially for people who are not in GA every day. But this is moving us forward as an industry, right? One thing I want to highlight about this, bounce rate has been replaced by a new metric called engagement rate. You're going to probably have a lot of conversations about what that is and why we're using it. It's basically defined as a user's session is considered engaged if they've actively viewed your website or mobile app in the foreground for longer than 10 seconds. So that, if you might remember the user engagement automatic event that we spoke about earlier, that's using that. So you're going to be tempted to try and calculate bounce rate. So you can just give bounce rate to your boss or to whoever's asking. But of course, I would encourage you not to do that because you probably all remember from your first day as an analyst that bounce rate is not a very useful metric. And most websites, it doesn't make sense. It's less helpful on a mobile app or a single page application. So this is solving a big problem we've been talking about for a long time. Bounce rate is one example of this. App+Web properties are going to force us to track conversions a little bit differently. I showed we now have a lot of different dimensions for our campaigns. We need to start thinking about users rather than sessions. So there's going to be a lot of changes coming up. And in addition to that, there are a few things that are just not ready yet in an App+Web property. I'm calling out a couple of them now. Again, App+Web properties are brand new. They're in beta. Google has not announced that they are ready for you to replace your existing tracking code with. So these are things that I am hopeful will all come out before the launch is official. But it's important to highlight that this is new and evolving, and some of these items on this list might be really important to you. If they are, or if there are not, my recommended next step is actually the same, which is to start today. So again, you can simply install a simple event or two on your website, on your mobile app. You can let it run. You're not depending on it yet because you've kept your other Google Analytics implementation installed. And then you can spend a little time evaluating it, trying to pull a report that you used to use a different tool for, using App+Web. You do an hour a week or so. Then over time, you'll get confident in it and you'll be ready to flip the switch. I'm generally telling clients they should plan 2021 to be a time where they're switching over from Universal Analytics to the new App+Web. So that is a lot. I've spoken really quickly. My last slide here is just to open it up for questions. Adam, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I will. While you take a peek at some of them, we have a lot of questions, so we'll try to power through them. I'll just start while you're catching your breath, maybe get a glass of water. First one, is the App+Web user deduplication based on us still having to assign user ID, or is it based on Google's account data?
Yeah. It's more similar to what we're doing today, is the short answer, than Google's account data. So you do still have the user ID option. It's very similar. If you have users authenticating across websites and mobile apps, same way you do today, that's what you'll want to do in the future. But there are also some, when it comes to building audiences, just like today, you're actually able to take advantage behind the scenes of Google's intelligence and ability to recognize users outside of those tools.
Another question came in and someone answered it. Just want to verify that everything is good with this answer. Does App+Web have a free and a paid version like GA, or is it all free or all paid? And someone named JF had said there is a 360 version to it. So yes, there's a free and paid version. Is that kosher with you?
Well, yeah, so that's a great point. So while App+Web at this point in time, there's only a, this beta version that everybody's using there, as we can expect, just like with Universal Analytics, will be a paid App+Web version. But today, it's just the free version that's available.
Okay. And by the way, as we're doing questions, even if there's questions we don't get to, we're going to get to them in a written format. So please go ahead and put in as many questions as you can now. The next one I have is, with users being prioritized over sessions, coupled with the ever-increasing problem of cookies being eradicated, does putting the user at the forefront create some inherent issues with things like user counts, new versus return, etc.?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I would say the short out answer to that is yeah. So Google Analytics is in the new App+Web properties, and just like they were in Universal Analytics, is subject to browsers' tightening of privacy. I would like to throw this one on the list that I'll give a longer explanation to, because I do think that's one that deserves some attention that I don't have time to give in a quick QA right now.
Okay, another question. Does the new engagement metric consider every interaction on the page, for example, downloads, video views, etc.?
Yeah, so engagement is a little bit different. So engagement, the user engagement metric is that you pull in the report. I mean, I would say it's taking advantage of the fact that there's an automatic user engagement event. That being said, it also has visibility into the other sort of data points that you're sending as well. So the short answer is yes. If I'm trying to calculate, did someone spend some 10 seconds, for example, on the site, I'm collecting timestamps at different points in time. Your user engagement event that's automatic is going to do that, but other events that you send will also do that. So the answer is yes. I hope that's clear.
Okay, so another question, how do you cope with parameter limits? If you're using a lot of custom dimensions, the Firebase limits, even in the 360 version, are reached very soon because each parameter counts per event. So if you have 3 events and 2 parameters, that equals 6 parameters.
Right. Yeah. So this is something that I've written about in my blog, and again, I would like to add some more context to this. The short answer that I can give in a minute is you can't just port over very easily what you're doing in Universal Analytics to App+Web. You do need to do a little bit of strategy. Part of that strategy is taking a look at what you're tracking today and seeing if you should be using suggested events. A second piece of it that's definitely more complicated is imagining what do you want your reports to look like. You are limited to 500 unique events. Each of those events are limited to 25 dimension parameters, 25 metrics, and basically at the end of the day, you're right. If I have 2 events and they're repeating the same parameters, those parameters are counted twice. There's a lot to consider in terms of what the most efficient way is to pass those in so that you can view them in Google Analytics. The only and I have again a blog post that I would like to point you to for this. The only other thing that I will say on this topic quickly, though, is that you don't have those limitations in BigQuery. And I personally think that if you're using App+Web, it's really important to enable the BigQuery integration because that's one of many huge benefits of doing that.
And we'll be able to add the links to any of your blog posts to the written Q&A document. So another question came in is, so App+Web pings at regular intervals, is that to get better time spent numbers?
Yeah, I believe the question is specific to the user engagement event. That is correct. So that event, and by the way, this event is something that is in App+Web properties a bit under construction from my communication with Google. So the details of how frequently it pings and that kind of thing, I believe are evolving. So that to be said though, the purpose, the intent of the event is exactly as you stated, to let us count the time where users are actively engaged, looking at your browser or having your app in the foreground and counting those timestamps as they occur.
Okay, well, let's get to one more question, and then the rest of them we'll cover in the written format. Is the Google EDDL, the data layer, vendor agnostic? For example, can we also use it with something like Adobe AEP or Launch?
Yeah, so I would say that this question a little bit blurs the line of the presentation that Jim gave on the EDDL a couple weeks ago with the event-driven data model. They're really 2 different things. The way that Google Analytics App+Web property once your data structured is now going to be in a really similar format to the way that we're structuring data layers and what we talked about in that previous conversation. If you build your data layer the way that we had talked about previously as an EDDL, I do think that there are benefits to that that will help you understand what your data looks like in an App+Web property. But that data layer and the tool that you sit on top of it are, yes, they're separate. So you can have that data in an EDDL that you're sending to any tool, marketing tags. Google Analytics is just one possible destination you might pass that data along to.
Okay, awesome. Well, Ken, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for attending. We do have a bunch more questions we didn't have time to get to. We'll take care of those in written format, and we will post that as soon as possible to the Google Analytics channel in the Slack group for SDEC. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and we will see you at our next webinar.
Thank you.